Okay, great. Yolanda, I am very excited because we've had some really great feedback on socials, on all platforms actually, and some of the questions have been coming in. And people have obviously been getting some of the information from the podcast. Others have been getting it from social media. But we have some of the questions are repeating themselves. I thought let's chat about those questions first. And then we can kind of move on to topics that we find a lot of our clients are chatting to us about, right? So the big question is what vehicle would you purchase in? So we have someone saying, would you purchase in a Toyota,
Mahindra, Yaris?
So I think let's try and make this a more personal question too. So what vehicle would you suggest you would purchase in, and why?
Yeah, so I think before answering that question, it's important for the viewers to understand that a vehicle is absolutely a personal thing, like, the structure. That's what we're talking about. When you are buying property, you're building a portfolio. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on your intended purpose for the property. Is it residential? Is it for investment? And, until you've answered those questions, you really cannot say that you are ready to make an informed decision that's going to be tax efficient and also create a lasting, legacy with your property portfolio. But I think personally, I would invest through a company. It makes sense. It's easy to do. It's easy to register a company in South Africa. And also another thing is the tax of companies.
Yes.
It does make sense, 27%, as opposed to a trust, which can actually end up leading to one paying way more tax, over 40%. But there is a structure that you can, play around with and have your property in your company and then your company be owned by your trust. So yeah, I would do that. But yeah, that's not a blanket answer.
No, and I like that you're saying it's not a blanket answer, because obviously we need to look at the person's situation before you make that decision. But so why would a trust be something that someone purchases a property and places a property in? Just as a comparison for someone listening that maybe has for a long time believed that they should be having a trust fund for their trust fund babies. So why not purchase? Or not why not, but why would someone purchase in a trust?
So it's not necessarily purchasing in a trust, but it's making sure that you use a trust as, a tool to basically structure your investments in general. It's not just property. You can put anything in a trust. But how you put it in there, especially if you're going to be using those assets to earn income, is very important, because now you are triggering income tax. And so a trust is good for many reasons, provided the structure is properly. Like I said, make the company be owned by your trust. But it's good because it has perpetuity. So when you have a trust, I always say it's like if you're a family of 2, having a trust is like adding a third member to the family. Or if you're a family of 3, it's like adding a 4th member to your family. The only difference is that, member of the family never dies. So when we pass away as natural people, there's a winding up of deceased estates, which must happen. Your assets need to be wound up. There's tax, estate duty, that's death tax, that is triggered. With a trust, there's no such thing. So that's why people love a trust, so much. It's a good tool for wealth creation, but it's not something that should be, approached without full information.
Absolutely. And I think if you mentioned income tax, and I think that's another question that came up. Someone was asking whether, if you're going to place the property in a company, or you're not going to then pay double tax, because I think the idea there is they think you're paying, company tax, and then you're also going to pay income tax. Maybe we can chat about income tax. I think the other thing that came up was someone said, I'm not South African. Do I have to pay tax? That's a separate question, but income tax specifically, maybe we can chat about the fact that, the reason why the structure that we speak about is great is because of that income tax. You're an investor and you're placing your property in a company. That's the income tax that we need to really look at.
We need to understand income tax, because if you make income, you generate income, you will definitely be liable for income tax. And, that tax is actually levied on a certain percentage depending on the structure that you are using. So like I said, if it's in your personal name and you've added all your things together, you're getting paid obviously in your personal bank account. You're putting your investment property in your personal bank account, or you're putting your investment property in your name, so then it means the income also goes in your personal bank account. That can lead to a situation where the income that you generate from your job, from your property, becomes way more than what you would like it to be for tax reasons.
Yes.
And that is why, a structure such as a company can be beneficial for you, because if you have multiple sources of income, then the property generated, the income generated from the property will definitely be going into the company, and it's the only amount that gets taxed at 27%, whereas your salary doesn't affect that, meaning it doesn't take you to a higher tax bracket, which could even be over 40% if the structure is not there. So I think that's how income tax plays a role in that kind of situation or structure, and the importance of planning to make sure that you pay as little tax as possible.
So, and I just want to, just for anyone that's listening, just clarity, I get income into the company, right? And then I pay myself. Am I going to pay tax on that payment that I've paid myself to? So maybe that's where he was saying, that you're going to get the double tax, is that he's obviously looking at it as a company's going to pay tax and then he's going to pay on his income.
Yeah, I think one shouldn't confuse the different types of taxes. The company would pay income tax basically on all the income generated, less all the deductions, obviously.
Yes.
And then those expenses, deductions can sometimes be like employee salary. The employee, when they receive money from a company, even if it's your own company and you become an employee of the company, everybody pays income tax on their, on their salary. And, they call it pay as you earn.
Yes.
So you will definitely pay tax. You cannot avoid that. So that's why it's good to actually have a consultation with people who know how to help you structure things in a better way. Maybe you end up not needing that much income after all because of how you've structured your investment. And I think different, structures will work for different people, but there's no getting around your company paying income tax. There's no getting around you paying, tax with regards to pay as you earn if you are earning a salary from your company. So yeah, all of those things.
And I think, the other question then that you maybe are answering by saying there's no getting around paying these various taxes is, even if you're not South African, there is no getting around paying these taxes, right? So it's about being efficient and getting the right advice so that you are going to pay the tax, but you're not going to pay unnecessary amounts of tax.
Absolutely. And I can give you an example of that.
Yes, please.
So we have a client who was actually a couple from Germany buying property here in Cape Town, Valdavia Estate. They just relied on information they got from the person that was assisting them. And they were told that, okay, you're not going to pay transfer duty because the seller is a VAT vendor.
Yes.
Only to find that actually the seller was a VAT vendor at some point, but at the time they were buying property, the seller was not a VAT vendor. And therefore that triggered transfer duty, which they were not expecting to pay.
Wow.
And because of the value of the property they were buying, transfer duty was over 800,000. That is almost $1 million lost because
and not even planned for.
Because you didn't structure properly, because you didn't understand your specific situation, because you just simply didn't do your homework. So that is
so anyone listening, I just want to stop you there, and I just want to talk about that specific example that you've given us now is in the off-plan space, we're always talking about VAT and no transfer duty as being one of the main reasons people look at purchasing an off-plan property. But you do get these scenarios that people come to me with or come to you with, and they say, I'm purchasing as a second purchaser, so I'm purchasing a resale. However, the seller is a VAT vendor, and so there's no transfer duty. And it sounds really exciting because, wow, managed to get around it. However, you do get penalized if that VAT vendor, like you say, isn't operational at the time. But how else is that kind of selected? How do they select the VAT vendor? So you and I had this conversation last time on the podcast, and we were saying that you get some people that are VAT vending, but they're not property VAT vending. Do you want to maybe just elaborate on that?
Yeah, no, I can definitely do that. So a VAT vendor is simply a person that, anyone who offers a service or a business person can be a VAT vendor. There are requirements that will trigger VAT registration, basically, or there are requirements for one to register as a VAT vendor. If you're making more than $1 million a year, you have to register as a VAT vendor. Or if you want to actually charge VAT on the services that you provide, but you're not yet earning $1 million, you can still apply, but there are certain things that you need to do now. Almost all developers, I don't know a developer who's not a VAT vendor. They are VAT vendors, which means when they are selling you property, VAT has already been considered in the purchase price, which is the beautiful thing about buying, off plan, like we always say. And that is why it's important for people who are buying from a non-VAT vendor to understand that there is, a certain type of tax that will get triggered. That's called transfer duty. And they pay it because they're acquiring property. It's a SARS requirement. It does not matter whether you were ignorant of the law. It is the law that tax must be paid, even if somebody misled you. So that's why the due diligence is important. And that's why, I heavily deal with clients, especially buyers, helping them with the due diligence before buying property, helping them register companies, understand tax, understand which tax liabilities can be triggered, and avoiding those actions or and conduct that can lead to you being liable for tax. So it's all about really being informed, and once you are informed, you are able to actually avoid all of the mess that comes with not knowing what you're doing.
Okay, so thank you so much for answering that. I think we can actually move on to the next question, which was also from an international client, I'm assuming. They said, what happens if I pass away and, my property was purchased in South Africa? How does that happen? How do my kids get looked after? I think he's more talking about his deceased estate. Do you maybe want to touch on that?
Absolutely. So because we're speaking to global investors interested in investing in South Africa, particularly real estate, it's important to think about what's going to happen to your assets when you pass away. That is why estate planning is an instrumental part of doing the whole thing, right? So you need to have a will that will deal with not only your assets from your home country. Let's say you are from the US or from Germany, you need to have a will that's going to deal with your South African assets. And that is where also I always say I'm the queen of due diligence. When you are buying, have a checklist. We always give our clients, and even people who are not our clients, a checklist that will give them everything they need to know before they sign the the contract, to make sure that they are prepared and that they've thought about everything. So then once you sign, that even if I pass away 10 years from now, my property structure is proper. My children are going to be taken care of. It's creating a legacy. There's not going to be tax, estate duty, and all those things, death tax. And that's how you take care of things to ensure that when you pass away, everything is going to go according to your wishes. So your will is important to deal with the assets worldwide. So yeah, that's the answer for that.
Okay, so the next question that I also get this question quite often, and I think you're going to be the best person to answer this because, of course, legal is the way to answer this, is how do I kind of protect myself from buying a bad deal? The financial risks that come, we've touched on a little bit of how someone can really get burned if they're not careful about due diligence. But yeah, maybe you can answer this question about how do they make sure they're not buying a bad deal?
Absolutely. Always helping my clients with that. Due diligence is very important when you are buying property. Before you even think of signing anything, I know Cape Town is a beautiful place. South Africa is beautiful. Joburg is beautiful, in general. And you can really just be ready to sign on the dotted line as soon as you see the property. But there's a lot of work that needs to go in before you actually decide, okay, now I know what I'm doing. And that's the due diligence. That's, the process of you saying, okay, if this is not an off-plan property, I'm buying from somebody who's owned this before, do I understand the clauses in the contract? You need to work with a property lawyer that is qualified, not just any lawyer, because lawyers also have different practice areas. You need a property lawyer, and they're going to help you understand clauses such as the footstoots clause, which means you're buying this as is. It's not really a concern when you are buying off plan because it's new, but when you're buying a second-hand property, don't know if there's such a thing as secondhand, but if you're buying property that has been owned already, you need to be thinking about, things like footstoots. It means you're buying it as is. And you cannot sign until there are clauses that will protect you to say, what happens if there are latent defects, meaning big, defects in the property that are hidden, that can only be uncovered by a professional inspection company. What clauses can be included in the contract to ensure that if there are any defects, they are dealt with before the property is transferred into your name? Because remember, once it's transferred into your name, it becomes your liability. You have to deal with it. If there's a burst geyser, like we've seen in case law, where people lose over millions because of a hidden defect which wasn't handled properly by a property attorney in the contract. And I mean this from the standpoint of you as the buyer need to take steps to protect your interests. So the seller is already instructed their lawyers to draft the contract, or the agents have already had the contract drafted. So it's your responsibility to make sure you understand all those clauses, and you take the necessary steps to have the contracts reviewed, and also change some of the clauses to your benefit.
So can you actually, and this footstoots clause is something that I think is quite interesting, right? So can you actually enforce that someone, so let's say the client says you can get the property at X amount footstoots, and you say, but I can see that there's a massive XYZ happening here. Are you saying that you can add that to the clause, the client must be obligated to fix that? Or are you saying that you get that fixed before the footstoots? So what I'm saying is so footstoots, is that after they've obviously agreed to fixing that, and then thereafter you need to accept it? Or are you saying it's footstoots, but you've acknowledged that these three things? I just want to know, is it still the client's responsibility if it's been acknowledged?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Remember, a contract is an agreement between two parties. So you can agree literally to anything. There could be a big crack in the wall, and you can say, yes, I'm buying this, it's a fixer-upper, I'm happy to pay it, but you've negotiated that it wasn't damage or a defect that was hidden. The seller acknowledged that there is a defect, and therefore you are in a position as a buyer to agree and accept, that property footstoots. But there is a disclosure, which is a legal requirement actually by the seller. But the seller, seller is only required to disclose defects that they know about, and most sellers don't live in their investment properties, so they will tell you, we don't know of any defects. It doesn't mean there's no defects, they just don't know about it. And that's why it goes back to that process being your homework, for you to actually get the wording altered, so that you can have a property inspection company appointed to inspect the property, and then the result of that inspection, if there's a defect, can help you negotiate with the seller, because I thought the value of this property is 4 million, but now there is a crack on the wall that will cost me 500,000 to fix. I think it's not worth it to buy it for 4 million. Let's rather make it 3.5.
So you negotiate the price as per.
Yeah, because you are now aware, you've taken the steps, you've had a company go and check out the property.
Amazing. And I think from an off-plan perspective, what clients are offered is a snagging period. So you also get that opportunity where you say it's a conversation. It's not just one-sided. It shouldn't be one-sided.
Absolutely.
So maybe another way to answer the question is to say that, how do you identify this as a bad deal? Is that it's not a one-sided experience.
It's not
is that there is that opportunity where the seller is acknowledging XYZ is already, needs to be fixed, and they take responsibility. I think with new developments, the hope there is that you've got warranties in place. You've got the contractors still on site when you're doing the snagging, so things can be fixed, brought back to the right condition. And you also obviously have that time of that, whatever the department has only been standing for. However, latent defects are things that can only kind of be shown at a later stage. I kind of want to talk about that. If it's okay for us to just talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about the difference between patent and latent. If anyone listening hasn't actually purchased a property before, we do have first time purchases on here. So just very quickly, a patent defect is something that you can almost see it's with the naked eye. It's think of it as a material defect. It's something that's what's another word to describe this?
Yeah, it's obvious.
It's an obvious.
You know, somebody doesn't need to do an inspection or like a thorough investigation to figure out if there's it's that loose door handle.
Yes.
You can see
you
it.
can
Any
see it with your
reasonable
naked eye.
person can see
Exactly.
it. And if you are on a high and you're excited, you don't see it, you miss it, then it's your problem.
Correct. And I think you do get companies nowadays, third-party companies. If you're purchasing from a developer, there are third-party companies that can actually come and do this for you, where they've got a trained eye. So maybe you aren't present, you live in another country. How am I going to snag my apartment? How am I going to get these issues resolved? You can have someone come and do it on your behalf. I would suggest having that be a third party.
And
then latent defects.
Yes, I love latent defects.
Do you want to go there? Yeah.
Those are the ones that take us to court. And people lose a lot of money, fighting legal battles because they bought a bad deal. But that's simply because they bought without the due diligence. If you, like you said, there are companies, third-party companies, and you as the buyer must take control. Don't, outsource it to someone else to do. Just, take control and get a company, to go and inspect the property to make sure there are no latent defects. These are defects that you see at a later stage, like you said, or you can see immediately if, a thorough investigation or inspection is conducted on the property. And these defects, can be regulated, even in the contract. You can say that the property will not be transferred until the inspection company has issued a report confirming there are no latent defect, because these are actually very expensive generally to deal with, whereas a patent one that is a simple defect that you should have maybe seen when you're viewing, it's normally small things that you can even deal with, and maybe you even negotiate into the contract because you can see it. It's not behind the the door, or there's furniture hiding the things. So that's
and
why
latent defects normally only show up or present themselves once you've been living in the property, unfortunately. So until the water's been running, how are you going to know that there has been this leak for
then that's your responsibility, because now you are the owner. Remember, in a contract of sale, risk passes upon transfer of the property. So if there's a leak that happens somewhere down the line and you're already the owner, you can't really go back to the seller.
No.
And say, oh, this property, there's a problem. That is why the company that, is mandated to look behind the things, the furniture and everything else that, could potentially be hiding a big defect. That's why they're in place to do that for you. And once that is done, then you've done your due diligence. Then whatever happens in future, you are the owner, the risk has transferred into your name just as the property has, and you will deal with that. That's why there's insurance as well. You need to have insurance, but we're talking about those things that insurance won't even cover you, because why would they want to pay for something that happened before you were the owner? Because remember,
and they'll do their research and they'll do their investigation. Exactly. And then finally, I think with latent defects, just to kind of close that out, is in the agreement you can also say that you have a certain time frame to pick this up, right? So you can buy yourself that amount of time. So like warranties have time periods where you've got 45 to 60 or 90 days or whatever it is, making sure that your agreement is kind of allowing for that time for you to run the water.
Absolutely. As a buyer, you definitely have the time. And I mean, just to give you an example quickly, we have a client who just recently purchased a penthouse. And last week, I went to actually see the penthouse because she's not in the country. So I took handover of the key and I'm doing the snacks, looking at everything to see if everything is fine. And I picked up that the window was cracked. And I told the developer, and they were like, okay, yes, you have 30 days. You can still check and see if there's nothing else, and they will fix it. And it's as simple as that.
But if you'd gone in 2 months later, you know, that is on her for not having had someone
neglected the timeline within which to deal with the snacks, to pick them up and then bring them to the attention of the seller, and then the seller will attend to them within the specified period.
And I think it is important to say that, you know, it's got to be fair to both parties. I think with the developer, we can't, you know, they can't wait 7 months for you to pick up on that crack because you live in another country for 7 months, you know. The contractors would have left site. Their contracts would have come to an end. So even the supplier that supplied the developer that needs to come and fix the glass has gone. So I think this has been a really good topic. I think we can move on to the next one, which is another non-resident question, which is people are asking, can they purchase in a company if they're a non-resident? Can they buy a property and place it in a company in South Africa if they are not from South Africa?
Absolutely. That is yes.
Yes.
Anyone can start a company in South Africa, whether resident or non-resident, as long as you follow the requirements. And, you know, most people who are not here, you know, rely on the services of their lawyer, you know, the property lawyer, to help them with that. But the process basically, you know, includes you putting together the paperwork, and then everything being sent to the relevant, you know, organization that will help the registration of the company. That's the CIPC. Now, it's also important to understand the responsibility that comes with opening a company, obviously, to put your property in. And it's also important, and you can discuss that with, you know, your lawyer, property lawyer. It's also important to understand the tax obligations and everything else, but also that you can actually have your company that's registered, i.e. in America, you know, hold your South African property. The only thing is, if you want your company that's registered in America, your LLC, to hold your assets in South Africa, and you want those assets to be used to generate income, you're going to be expected to register for income tax, which means what we then do is we register your LLC as an external company in South Africa. So this is for people who, you know, we're helping clients currently, they're buying property here, they don't want to start a new company, they have a company in their home country. So what we're doing is we're helping them get the property transferred into that company, and that company is going to be registered as an external company. However, that might be more costly than starting a South African company, which is easier, and also it just makes the tax work a bit more neater, because now you don't have to pay or worry about double tax. You know, in this company that's registered in Angola or America, you're paying income tax in America. Now you're going to pay income tax in South Africa because your property is obviously generating income that's going into that company. So there's quite a lot, but I think the simple way is to just register a company in South Africa, keep your South African assets in that company, and the tax compliance becomes easier.
Amazing. And okay, so then I think that's a question that I definitely think if someone is listening and they've got a company in a foreign country and they're looking to buy property right now, I think that this question is definitely important to them, but also that they can reach out to you, and she can assist. Well, your company can definitely assist with you know, all of that. So if you've already purchased in a foreign company. So that's the other thing I wanted to chat to you about. So I had a client who had purchased 3 properties in various other names, and then they wanted to move these properties into a company because now they've come across this really important information, and now they want to do the right thing. So now they want to, you know, consolidate. There's obviously it's a very expensive process to do it later, and so I think what you're saying now is just prepare, right? Because now, in order to move, even though those companies are in their own names, the properties are in their own name, moving it into a company is going to charge, they're going to have to pay transfer duty in that process. And so it's quite expensive to make that mistake and then have to move properties around. So another question that we had, because someone had listened to our previous podcast about tax, was, okay, wow, I've now made the mistake. I've got all these properties in my name. I want to restructure. This is obviously very expensive, right? Because there's transfer duty, because you've now got to move these properties, because you've got to see a company as a separate entity, right? So you've got to move these properties from your name into the company. Do you want to talk about how you tackle that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are times when clients have already made the mistake of putting their properties in their personal name. It's not too late. Listen, the consequences of putting property in your personal name are going to be far greater if you delay the process of moving them. So, for instance, you could end up paying millions in estate duty in 20 years' time, as opposed to the small investment you're going to make now to move them in a different structure. So, the whole process we use in order to solve that problem is called restructuring. Basically, we look at your property portfolio. How many properties do you have in South Africa? How are they structured? And we show you the tax liabilities that you are triggering in the current state. And then we make recommendations as to what you need to do to make sure that you avoid losing millions. So you will find that it's way better to basically spend, not even 10 or 5 or even 2% of the money that you're going to lose at a later stage now, to make sure that you don't end up, and it's not you who loses, actually your children or the people that you're working for. So it's easier, and it's actually much more cost effective to do it sooner rather than later. Because with the later part of it is the person who ends up winning more is SARS, the taxman.
Do you want to just explain that part of the loss, right? So I think it's just for someone that maybe doesn't understand how are they losing, right? So I've got 3 properties in my name. What do you mean I'm losing?
Example.
Okay.
You now have these 3 properties. Let's say one of them is worth 4 million. In 10 years' time, that property is 15 million. Or in 20 years' time, and you happen to pass away, then the property is worth 25 million.
Please God.
Which can happen. The unfortunate part of that story, and on your estate, of course, because now you're no longer in the picture, is that your children have to actually take transfer of the property, because you put it in a structure that doesn't allow them to continue just benefiting from the properties even after you're gone. That is basically legacy creation lost. You actually now have triggered tax events, estate duty, which is basically death tax. You pay it on the gross value of your estate, and it gets triggered when you pass away. Of course, your estate will owe that, and it can be a lot of money. I've seen people who pay over even 5 million to SARS just for tax because they died. And obviously you are not paying it. It's your estate because you are
just
dead.
Going out of your estate.
It's a lot
not
of
going to your kids.
Yeah, it's a lot of things, because also now you have an executor that's winding up your estate. I've dealt with estates in our firm where people have acquired assets over 70 million. Do you know how much 3.5% of 70 million is? It goes to the lawyer who deals with the winding up of your estate, because you didn't structure your assets properly. You didn't put them in a structure that's not going to trigger tax situations, fees with the office of the master, with the lawyer, with tax, all of those things because of poor structure. So it's way more expensive, and it actually the loss results in millions if you do it later. So yeah, that is basically the example I can give you.
I think it's a very good example, and I think it's anyone looking to build a property portfolio, anyone that has been very excited about buying more than one property. I think it is very important to just maybe stop what you're doing, not stop buying property, but just maybe go back to the drawing board, and just get advice. I think you can get very busy. I do find that sometimes we focus maybe in the profession that we're in, and we don't really think that there's enough time to focus on just structuring things right. And so getting that advice, like you say, it's a small fee to do it right now and to correct it, then to leave it. Okay, so I mean, I love that we're just kind of helping people understand that they've got to do some due diligence. They've got to make sure they're asking the right questions. Another question that I saw came up was, how do I send money to South Africa. So obviously we're buying property. We've got clients, quite a few non-residents, sending money to South Africa. We've got the Reserve Bank. Do you want to maybe talk to that transaction itself? So I'm buying a property and I'm moving money into the country.
Yeah, no, that's very important. And if it's not done right, it's very painful in the end, because you end up losing money to SARS, the taxman. So we have the currency control regulations, which, basically regulate how money should be introduced into the country for different reasons, like, investments in property or whatever you are doing. So when you're buying property, it's very important to consider how you are moving funds from your country into the transferring attorney's trust account. Because at a later stage, when you try to repatriate those funds, you will need to prove certain things. So let me give you an example. Some people buying in the name of their company, so they start a South African company, but they're borrowing money from their personal account into their South African company, and they just send that money through, pay the purchase price. There's no paper trail to show what you've been doing, to show that, okay, this is not going to be seen as if I've generated income one day when I take the money back and therefore be liable for tax. So they don't think about all those things. But the actual truth is you need to be thinking about what's going to happen when I try to get this money back. What will SARS look at this money as? Is it going to be considered income or a loan? If you want it to be considered a loan, where you are not liable for tax and you don't basically make a loss, you need to then, when you are introducing funds, speak to somebody that's knowledgeable. Normally a property attorney will also link you up with currency partners, and there will be loan agreements that your property attorney drafts where you are loaning money from your personal name into your South African company, and that paper trail is going to help you basically get that money back. And also, you're not allowed as a foreign investor to just loan your company money in South Africa without the approval of the South African Reserve Bank. So most people don't know that. They think I can just send the money. I had a client who was about to build, because we also do property builder support. She was about to build. She bought land. Actually, she was in the process of buying land, and she wanted to send the money to her friend, so that the friend can help her, because she's in America, the friend is here, she can help her make payments. And we literally said, stop, you cannot do that. You cannot do that. Introduction of funds is something that investors need to understand, and if it's done incorrectly, it will definitely lead to devastating results. So very important to understand that and make sure that you are bringing in the money to cover the purchase price in a way that is compliant with our law.
Amazing. And so would you then say in this scenario, obviously I think it's a question that does need a little bit more sensitivity, and someone will need to have a consultation. I do believe we need to just remind listeners that everything we're discussing is very much at the very beginning of the conversation, and each individual case needs to kind of dive deeper. However, having said that, if I'm buying as an international person and I do want to just transfer the money in, is it then wise to purchase in my personal name as an international person?
Look, it depends on what you are buying for.
Okay.
If it's your first property, it's a residential property that you're buying, you're not going to be using it to generate income, then it may be best to just keep it in your name. And there are some benefits to that as well. But if you're buying properties for investment, and you just want to cut the long process of introducing funds by putting it in your name, you're literally solving one problem by creating another problem.
Absolutely.
So it depends on why you are buying the property. What are you going to use it for? And that's why, each case will be looked at based on its own merits.
Okay, so then I want to talk about hidden costs and expenses. We speak about this in the previous podcast, but a lot of questions came back about this, and I want to maybe touch on occupational rent. What is it? Why do developers charge it? It is also something that gets charged if you're doing a regular resale. I do know that some people have occupational rent there too. So let's maybe touch on that. So from my perspective, occupational rent in that scenario where it's a resale is mainly just someone wants to take occupation of the property before it's in their name, right?
Yeah.
So in a very simple way to describe it, you're just taking the key, you're accessing the property that you're in the process of purchasing, and it's in a period where the properties are being transferred into your name. So the attorneys are working on all the documents, and it hasn't actually been registered in the title deed. It hasn't been registered in your name yet. Do you want to maybe touch on occupational rent from your perspective?
Yeah, of course. I think you've mentioned it very nicely, you've summed it up. Basically, if you want to gain access to a property before it's yours, and I've had a few clients not be happy about the fact that they have to pay occupational rent because they've already paid the full purchase price cash. So they feel like, why do I have to pay occupational rent for a property that I've already paid for in full? And the simple answer is, listen, you are a party to the agreement as much as the seller is. And occupational rent is one of the many clauses in the contract which you can either agree to or move on and find another property that will not, include a clause on occupational rent. In fact, I've done contract reviews during the buyer's due diligence process for multiple clients, and they, some of them, end up saying it's fine because we explain you're going to pay occupational rent, and you always have a happy client if they know what to expect. So you're not hiding anything from them. You help them understand you're going to pay occupational rent because you will be expected to take occupation before the property is yours, because before it's transferred into your name. Some clients say, okay, that's fine, I'm going to sign. That's not a deal breaker for me. Other clients say, nope, I'm not paying for any occupational rent for a property that I've already paid cash for. So I think it's important for buyers to understand that they can make the decision.
Yes,
in terms
it's a conversation.
Whether,
again.
You can negotiate.
It's a negotiation.
Yeah,
point,
but the rationale is it's not yet your property until it's in your name.
Yes.
Irrespective of whether you've paid the full purchase price or not. Now you can choose to negotiate with the seller, and sometimes maybe they'll hear your side, especially if it's a resale, and they want to save the deal. They'll let you buy the property and not pay occupational rent, or maybe they'll limit the amount of occupational rent that you need to pay. But at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to negotiate for your contract, and having
I do
somebody
think it's
to help.
important to speak to why.
Yeah.
So why does a developer charge occupational rent? I think most people just think it's like, why would you want extra money from me? I've given you, like you say, you're sitting with my capital, there's interest, etc. Firstly, the developer isn't sitting with the capital. In some scenarios, the attorneys are sitting with the capital. So that interest is not being earned. In most scenarios, it should be sitting with the attorneys. And so they're not earning that interest. They don't sit with your capital until it registers into their name, or your name, sorry. And then there are expenses that the developer has while you're basically on site doing your snagging, because you need to access this unit. You need to either furnish the units so that you can get onto the market as soon as possible. So you are going to occupy the unit before it's in your name in most scenarios. And so sometimes it is forced occupation. Right, so it looks like it's being forced, but in reality it benefits you to get in sooner, get the things sorted before it's in your name. So I would even go as far as to say, do the snagging and everything in that period, because it's not in your name yet, so you can still contest all this stuff. But pay occupational rent, because at the end of the day, the developer has to be paying. What are the fees that the developer's paying in this scenario?
They have to get municipal clearances, so they pay money for that, and many other things. And just to add, maybe to comfort the buyer a little bit, that money that's sitting in the trust account is actually adding interest for the benefit of the buyer. So the developer indeed does not gain access to that money until the unit is transferred into the buyer's name. But in that time period, the developer definitely has to cover all the expenses relating to the transfer of that property. And that's why occupational rent is applicable, So the buyer needs to understand that, yes, you've paid the full purchase price to the transferring attorneys. They've kept it in a trust account, and they are required by law to invest it, not for the developer's benefit, for your benefit. If you haven't signed an authority to invest, they still have to invest it by law, but you will not get the interest. And it doesn't go to the developer, it goes to the Legal Practice Council. And that's how it works. So
you just touched on something very important there. And I think this is something that I see a lot of clients missing. Is not signing that authority to invest.
I have a client who's lost
believe it.
over $500,000.
No.
She bought a penthouse in 2023. She was asked because in order for the money to be invested, you have to provide your FICA.
Yes.
She did not provide. She provided her passport. She did not provide her proof of address. She put over 6 million in the attorney's trust account. Do you know how much 6 million will earn at 7.5% from 2023 until now? And she lost all of that money because she didn't give proof of address. She didn't sign the authority to invest.
So why is it important that the attorneys get this? I mean, I think
It's part
FICA is
of-
very important.
FICA is
Absolutely.
important.
But, like you said, by law, they have to invest it. So someone's going to get this money.
Yeah.
Firstly, who's getting that money?
The Legal Practice
Okay.
Council. Well, the Fidelity, I think, between the Legal Practice Council and we have an FFC regulated by the Fidelity Fund, and basically to protect the buyer. If the attorney, does something, they misappropriate funds, then the buyer can claim from that. But yeah, I think the FICA, to get to FICA, it's important because you have to know your client. When you are dealing with clients who are investing money, you are considered to be an accountable institution as a law firm, as a real estate agency, and FICA is part of that compliance. You cannot receive money to avoid things like money laundering and all these illegal activities happening. Even cybercrime, you have to know who you're dealing with so that you're always mindful and that money doesn't get embezzled or laundered through this property transaction. So when you know your client, when opening the bank account, because we property lawyers will actually be the ones that manage the investment, will open it up with the bank, that we have investment accounts with on behalf of clients. And the bank also wants to know whose money is this, and they want to know where's their passport, what is their proof of address. They're not going to save money on behalf of somebody that doesn't exist.
Yes.
So
yes.
That's why FICA is important.
No, it
there are
is
many other
important, yeah.
reasons. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Yolanda. I think this has been a very informative podcast session that we've had with you. I'm excited to have you back on again. I think we're going to get lots of questions that we can answer. There is a final question that I have for you, and this is because this question came on as a comment, and it was about piercing the corporate veil. I think it was a very interesting guy.
Yeah.
I loved the way he phrased the question. It was hilarious. I think we've had quite a few comments this way.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about piercing the corporate veil?
Yeah.
Just very quickly. I think you know the comment I'm referring to.
No, I definitely remember the comment. I think the commenter really has been reading up on the legal literature. But it simply means, when you have a company and the company is obviously seen as a separate juristic entity, meaning whatever it does, if it gets sued, the owner of the company is safe. They're not going to look beyond the company to say, okay, you need to pay this 4 million because you did 1, 2, 3. They look at the company because he is just, he's using the company to trade and, to conduct business. However, for people who engage in illegal activities, or you basically are running away from your creditors, the corporate veil can be pierced. And it simply means that the law or the court can allow for creditors to look beyond, the company to basically open up and actually come after you, the owner, so you don't end up using the company to commit your own illegal activities, and that is when creditors are grieved. So and so owes me money, and they are basically using the company or their trust as a facade, and yeah, this is what they're doing, and I want the court to overlook the fact that this is a company that's responsible. I want the court to actually go into the person's personal assets, and make sure that I get what is due to me, my money back.
But what we were discussing was, of course, not looking at anyone that's intentionally looking to be a scammer.
Yeah.
So,
no, that's not who we deal with.
In most cases, this isn't going to be a conversation.
It's not applicable. It's really not applicable to the people that we assist, because the people that we assist are genuine investors. They're ready to comply with the law. They are not afraid of paying tax, but they're also smart. They don't just want to pay unnecessary tax. When they, have full information, they can actually make informed decisions in their investment. So those are the people that we're talking to, and not somebody that's going to be scared of SARS or the court piercing the corporate veil.
But it's also saying that if something did go wrong to this person that did it above board, then they can be protected.
Yeah,
Their company
that's
can
another
protect
side.
them, right?
Yes.
So if you didn't intentionally go in as a scammer and something did go wrong, but you were able to structure correctly, then you can be protected. And so I think piercing the corporate veil, like you say, is almost next to none, because you need to be able to prove that this person intentionally did.
Yeah, there are certain things that need to be, proven in court, and you are 100% right. If you actually acted in the best interest of the company, and at the time you were doing what you were doing, you were, acting in your capacity as a director. Maybe obviously you're a shareholder as well if it's your own company, and the company does something to make it liable, to creditors. You are not going to be personally liable if there's no, intention proven that you actually, wanted to scam your creditors, you didn't want to pay. So they don't just pierce the corporate veil for no reason. It has to really be, circumstances that allow for it to happen.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Off-Plan Space. My name is Antoinette Rebello, and we've had Yolanda from LCA Attorneys here joining us again. And we look forward to catching up again soon.